Hey, what's up guys? Today in this video, we are going to move ahead with our storefront and we are going to create the product detail page. To create the product detail page, the first thing that we need to do is fetch the data, right? So in part one of this video, we are going to look at how we can query the GraphQL API of vendor, get that product data, and then we will look at how we can use the component that we have already created and show that detail page. So let's get started. So to start with, I'm going to take a new approach this time. So I have already committed the code, and if you go to GitHub, I have 5 commits, and this is the code that we are looking at. So what I will do is I will again code everything which is here, but I will also explain you what I am doing so that we don't waste too much time doing stuff. Okay. All right. So there are a couple of files which I have changed 6 files to be precise. And let me close this, right? So yes, the first thing which I have done is, if you see, I decided that instead of saying details of a product, we will say products view. So which means the card component over here inside product card, this details becomes view. This is just a simple query change. But then what will happen is inside products, I will have a folder called view, and inside that I will have slug.tsx. So this is the component which will render the product detail page. It will take slug as a parameter and hence those square brackets, right? And so let's get started. Let's see what all things we need to do. So first of all, constant. So I'll try to keep these things on the same product details page, right? Now, as you can see, this spacing thing is going for a toss, and hence I have this editor config thing over here. So let me copy this, create that file. Right, so this editor config, once created, because I have the plugin, it will respect that thing of having 2 spaces. So layout, page title, and let me do npm run dev to start my application as well. Okay, and right, so this is it. Let's do export default product detail page, and with this in place, I think if I do localhost 3000, this is here, products, right? That's in place as well. And what if I do laptop? What's the URL? view/laptop. That's fine. I think we are in good shape now. We can move ahead, right? So let's see. The editor config thing is done. This is done. Now there is a lot of things happening over here. This is something which we have already done, but in details I will go into a little later. But we are first of all defining get static paths and get static props. So what are these two things? Well, basically, I think we haven't created any page as of now where it's a dynamic route. Okay. Now in Next.js, if you look at this particular thing, we have the file name as square bracket slugs. So this means it's a dynamic route. It will get slug as a parameter. Now, when do we get that parameter? When it's a Next.js page. So we will need that inside our server-side rendering function, right? So in these cases, there are 2 things which will need to happen. We need to tell Next.js what are the functions, or rather what are the actual paths which Next.js should allow. The reason is Next.js will build all the paths for you, right? If it is a statically generated path, if you don't want to keep it dynamic, right, the Jamstack, so as to say, you will need to define all the paths which are available for Next.js. And once you do that, only then you can go into the next function which is responsible for fetching that information. Okay, otherwise it will complain. So as a starting point, why don't we just copy this and let's quickly understand what is happening. So I'm exporting a constant which is an async function of type getStaticPaths. Okay, let me import that. Now getStaticPaths expects us to return something. Okay, it expects us to return paths, which is going to be an array, and the second parameter is a fallback. Now what is a fallback? Fallback says whether I should display a page not found or I should go ahead and allow it to dynamically render based on this parameter. If I say fallback is false, that means it will not fall back on any route, or it will not fall back on rendering dynamically. Whereas if it is set to false or set to false, what is going to happen is whatever is there in the array of paths, that is the only thing which will be acknowledged, okay, or given preference. So let me explain it to you then. I'll save this file. I hope it allows me to run the page without, the get static props is also required. So let us quickly first add that as well. So get static props expects us to return an object where we should have props, right? Yes. For now, it can be empty. They don't have a problem. Props is empty, right? So we can do this, but at the bare minimum, this is something which needs to be returned. So now I think my page should load. So now we see that we are getting a 404. Why? Because the path is empty, fallback is false. So what Next understands is there are no paths, and because the fallback is set to false, it will not allow you to render the page, but rather give a 404. But the moment we do fallback is true, and we come to this page, can we see this page renders? Actually, at this point, even any random thing will not result in a 404, but it will rely on our code to render whatever is required. So if you have pages which are dynamic in nature, that then in this case you would ideally want to do that. But in our case, we don't have that kind of a thing. We will typically know what are the products, and we will build a site if new products are added. Okay, so that's where I'm coming from. So now, because we know that we need to create those paths, I will set the fallback to false, so that it starts giving 404 again, right? And then let's try to render the slugs. Okay, so now obviously what we will do, or what we are doing over here, is we are creating an instance of vendor service. So let me do that. Okay, with that done, let me open up vendor service as well. And inside vendor service, we need a function called fetch product slugs. Okay, that's fine. Let's do that as well. I'll just copy this, come over here, copy this function name and paste it over here. So public fetch product slugs is an async function. The query will change. So instead of product listing, what I'm doing over here, where is my service file? Here it is. So we are doing product slug, right? So this query is basically over here. Let me show you product slug. And if I do demo.vendor.io, go to the playground and run this query, can you see all these slugs are available, right? So this is the query that we need to run. Let me quickly copy this entire thing, come over here, product slug query.ts. Okay, product slug query.ts, correct? This is here, and then we'll do What is the name? Product slug. I'm just trying to copy paste things from our code so that I will be able to explain you. I'll be able to spend more time explaining things rather than typing out things, because then it makes sense, right? The code is in front of you, so you will anyways get the hint from GitHub repository. All right, so our first query is in place. Okay, and what we are doing over here inside our get static paths is we get the response. So let's just do that here, and then I have my response, and then this piece of code I'll just explain you. So once I get the response, right, which is a response like this, we have ID slug inside product items, right? So what I'm doing is I'm looping through the product dot items, which is this array of objects, right? And I am taking that as product, and then inside the params I am adding this object, which is ID equals product ID and slug is product slug. This is important because in the parameters I'm saying slug, so this should be present. Okay, and finally I'm going to get an I would say an array of paths, okay, which will have params and then these objects. So I just need to do something like this. It's same as paths. Okay, that's it. That's the new syntax. I don't know how new it is, by the way, but yes, you can remove the colon and the paths. It is understood. Okay, with this, now let's go to a storefront, and can you see the page doesn't do a 404? Let's go back to the product page. Right, this is not going to render, obviously. This one is tablet. I'll go to products. Wireless optical mouse, it renders. 32-inch monitor, it will render as well, correct? But if I try doing 31, it gives a 404, and that is exactly what we wanted, correct? Because this is what is a correct slug. So we are in business, we are able to create the correct slugs, which NextJS needs to respect, and anything else will result in a 404. So now this is done, but then how do we send the data? Okay, this is the slug, right? How do we send the data of that particular product to the page, right, from the server side to the component? So that's where the get static props comes into picture. What get static props will do is this server side function gets the context. Now in this context we have the query parameter, which means this slug, right? So the idea is once we get the query parameter, once we get that slug, we will query the GraphQL API with the slug and get the product details. Pretty straightforward, right? So let's look at the code then. Can you see? First things first, we are taking the slug from the context.params. Okay, I'll just try to show you before we actually deep dive. This is the context object. I'll just refresh, and we see there is locales, local, default locale, params, and that is what we are interested in, right? So let's go to the code base, keep it over here, and do something like this. Now iparams, I haven't declared it, I have done it over here. I'll show you what exactly this means. First, let me import this. iparam is here, right? So how do I know that this needs to be iparams? So I'll show you the problem. So now it says that the slug does not exist in type parse URL query, or it is undefined. Why? Because params can can be undefined, right? So let's see. It says the get static props gets the parsed URL query. And this parsed URL query extends, if you see over here, is coming from query string. That's how I understood that if I can declare iparams that I'm expecting slug and it extends parse URL query, this problem will be solved. Okay, so that's how I came into I came up with this implementation. So now let's create an instance of video service. This is something I generally don't feel very comfortable. I think there are better ways to do this, because every time I'm doing a new instance of service which doesn't feel right, I'll see if I can do a static method, or maybe in any way inject or do something like that. We'll have to see that. But okay, code we can always refactor, right? So the service is calling a function called vendor service fetch product by slugs. So let's go over here, get the function name slug as a string is being expected. Now the query is different, obviously, right? So let's see what the query should be. Product details. This is the one. I'll get this query, and let's go back to our GraphQL interface. So we are saying that the query is a dynamic query because it has a variable called $slug. This variable is required. String with this ampersand sign means that that particular variable is required. It's a mandatory field, and that variable is passed to the product query as a slug parameter. So then come over here, slug. Let's just use this 32-inch monitor as the slug, close the bracket, and try something. All right, the data is available, right? If I do laptop, we get the laptop. Amazing. So let's use this query and see how easy it is to get the data. So copy everything. File name should be product details.slug.ts. That's interesting. .slug.ts. It should have been query.ts. I'll have to change that. I'll do that as a refactor. But product details.query.ts. When you are writing it, I would suggest you do a query. That makes sense rather than the slug, right? It's a mistake. So we have this. Passing it over here. Let's come to this particular thing, product detail, right? And variable slug should be slug. So now what is happening over here? So unlike the other queries like the slug, right, which just queries the items and the slug, right, it is not a dynamic query, to be precise, because it doesn't change. Every time it is going to give you the same result, or the query is going to be generally the same because there is no variable attached to it. Whereas if you look at the product details query, this query does change because it takes a parameter. So at one point it can be slug is 32-inch monitor, and some places it will be laptop, at some places it will be tablet. So how do we deal with that variance inside the GraphQL query? So we define the query, and then we say that this query depends on a variable, and that variable is slug. That slug is coming to this function as a parameter. So that's how we are sending it, right? So this is done. Response is available. Let's go to a code base now. Inside get static props. So response is here. Then what we are doing is pretty straightforward. Inside the props, I have this. So what are we doing? I'm sending the slug again. It is generally not necessary, but yeah, I mean, you can keep it. And then we are sending the product, which is response.data.product. So with this in place, what is going to happen is I can expect interface props, product of type, oops, not product item. I'll just define that over here, and then I'll get the product over here as a parameter, right? And then obviously I'll get product dot name, and even I can do an h1 and then product dot name. Back over here, and it is giving, right, it is not giving any error. It is now rendering 32-inch monitor, which means now if I go to any product, I can see the h1 and I can see the title over here as well. So this is good improvement, I would say, because now we are able to go to every product detail from this product listing page, correct? And I'll scroll down, camera lens, right? And for some reason, if I do something which doesn't exist, I even get a 404. Now, one thing which I will show you is delete the previous part. So now one thing which I would like to show you is that this is a code, and what will happen is something very interesting when we do a build. Okay, so this is fallback false and stuff like that, correct? Now, what if I do npm run build? Okay, before that, actually, stop. npm run dev. Okay, at this point, I'll go to products, switch off my Wi-Fi, and let's try to refresh this page. It doesn't work, right? Because during the development mode, I don't have statically generated pages. So this is going to fail. Now that the Wi-Fi is on, we refresh again. Okay, this is fine. It is loading. Now let's stop this thing. npm run build. Okay, the key is missing. Where is this products index? Let me quickly fix that. Right. Product.id should be present. So this is one good way, because when you create the build, right, you will see a lot of errors thrown at you if you have made any mistakes, which you may not be seeing if you don't look very closely to the console. Now this, can you see, generating static pages? It generated 58 pages. Okay, and that is what in the end results in that Jamstack, because now, as you can see, these paths along with 47 more paths got created. There was a URL called API hello, there was one URL called products as well. Everything is generated right now. If I do npm run, start, switch off the Wi-Fi, come over here, localhost products, right? Can you see this is working? The Wi-Fi is off. I can go into the product details. The tablet is visible. 32-inch monitor visible. Wireless mouse. Everything just works. How? The internet is still not working, right? I can show you, because if I try to refresh, you are not connected to the internet. So this is the beauty of Jamstack. This is now like a set of HTML pages running super fast, right? And that's the beauty of this piece. Now, one thing which I would like to tell you is that in here, because we have fallback as false, no other pages will work, and this shows 404, but if we would have kept it as true, it would have rendered. And at that point, you will depend on internet connectivity, because then a server-side function is getting called, right? That time you don't have a static generated page, because at that point you have dynamic routes, which will mean that on those routes a function will be called, right? So yes, that's about it. That's what I wanted to cover as part of creating the product details page, and I give you a quick glimpse of how the Jamstack is created. Let me know what you think about this. If you like this video, do click on the thumbs up icon and don't forget to subscribe to my channel.